Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Today's show, the CIA. Its new director is, for the first time, a woman. But what else do we know about Gina Haspel? And why did President Trump pick her? Well, we know one thing. She's no desk agent. She's a tough woman out in the field for years, waterboarding suspects and running black prisons. And what about the CIA spooks she now leads? Are they a force for good or evil in the world? We'll ask two men who worked at the agency for years. And finally, who are the best intelligence agents in the world? The Pakistanis, Russians, Israelis? We'll have our top 5 and lots more coming up right now in the Nexus. Hello, I'm Matthew Moore, and today in the Nexus we're playing I Spy with the CIA's new boss, Gina Haspel. Playing along with us, we have not one, but two very experienced ex-CIA operatives from very different sides of the office. Now, Ray McGovern is a former CIA analyst with 27 years' experience, and Professor Gene Coyle spent 30 years in the field trying to recruit informants. We're going to be talking to them a lot, but first, now we're all gathered, let's find out more about Gina Haspel, the tough woman who never backs down.
You give me the name. No. Let me do it the hard way. You do it the hard way.
Valuable information was obtained that allowed us to defend this country and prevent another attack. CIA follows the law. We followed the law then. We follow the law today.
The Senate has confirmed Gina Haspel as the next CIA director.
Haspel has faced criticism for running a black site in Thailand in 2002 where prisoners were tortured, including waterboarding.
I am troubled by her participation in the black ops site in Thailand.
We needed information about what else might be coming, what dangers exist, and I think she and others did America a great service here.
The first woman nominated to lead the CIA said the controversial post-9/11 interrogation program that critics call torture is a thing of the past.
I would never, ever take CIA back to an interrogation program.
They said, what do you think about waterboarding? I said, I like it a lot, and I don't think it's tough enough.
The president has asserted that torture works.
And don't tell me it doesn't work. Torture works, okay, folks?
Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, I don't believe that torture works.
Believe me, it works, okay?
We got valuable information from debriefing of Al-Qaeda detainees, and I don't think it's knowable whether interrogation techniques played a role in that.
You have to fight fire with fire.
Waterboarding is torture. And Gina Haspel not only condoned this, but went so far as to engage in the destruction of evidence.
First she was involved with the waterboarding, and then years later she was involved with destroying the tapes.
Tapes that contain some evidence about how that program was run.
Were you an advocate for destroying the tapes?
Senator, I absolutely was an advocate if we could within and conforming to U.S. law.
The president's pick to run the CIA spent more time talking about a controversial program from the past than her vision for the future.
One question I've not heard you answer is, do you believe that the previous interrogation techniques were immoral?
Our enemies will take note. Gina is tough. She is strong. And when it comes to defending America, Gina will never, ever back down.
Well, let's start off with Gene Coyle. Now, Gene, for viewers around the world who aren't following closely her 33-year career in the CIA, the thing they focus on, and the media focuses on, is her role in waterboarding in black prisons. Is she essentially a tough woman who endorsed torture and is now running the CIA? Is that how we should look at it?
I think you should look at it as that she's a tough woman who did in 2002 what the President of the United States said to do and said was legal. The Attorney General of the United States said was legal. The Office of General Counsel at the CIA said was legal. This retroactive deciding what's legal or not legal is nonsense.
Ray McGovern, if I could ask you, it's true, is it not, that what she did at that time was within the law?
You can't have laws that are secret in a democracy. These weren't laws, these were opinions by the likes of Gonzalez, who is the president's personal lawyer, and other corrupt officials who tried to square a circle. You can't make waterboarding legal. It's against the law. And you know, that's the wrong way to look at it when you come right down to it. It's not against the law. It's not wrong because it's against the law. It's against the law because it's just fundamentally wrong.
But Ray,
everyone acknowledges that as an evil, like slavery, like rape.
But
always
Ray,
intrinsically wrong.
People argue that those were extraordinary times, that nearly 3,000 Americans have just been killed in the most devastating attack since, what, Pearl Harbor. You wouldn't make an exception for those times?
There is no exception. The UN Convention on Torture specifically says no exceptions, even in times of civil war or aggression from abroad. No exceptions. And besides, it doesn't work. And that's the key for most Americans who think it does.
Gene Coyle, it doesn't work?
Well, not according to the people who were directly involved with it, including the director of operations, Jose Rodriguez, and I believe the vice president. Several people who were really involved with it said, yes, we got actionable intelligence out of it. You don't get to make up, you know, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. You don't get to have your own facts.
Okay. Let me go back to Ray. Ray, she says she's not going to return the agency to those times. So why do you still think she's a bad choice?
Well, the facts are that the Senate committee did a 4-year study and indicated that no information, zero information was gained through torture that was not available through other sources. So we have to be clear on those facts. Now, I'm forgetting the question
But she said she's not going to return the agency to those sort of enhanced interrogation techniques. So what's the problem with having her as the director now?
She got where she is by obeying the instructions of the men on up the line. Now, do you think that President Trump, who is an advocate of torture, of waterboarding, and worse, is going to pick a head for the CIA who openly says, no, Mr. President, I can't do that because I don't want to take the agency back to.
But wait a minute. He is on record as saying, look, I'm for it, but I will be guided by the experts.
Yeah, right. You can believe that if you like.
Okay.
Trump is unpredictable. I don't believe that for a second.
Let me show the viewers some pictures of you now. You were at the Senate confirmation hearing, I believe, and you were protesting very hard against her appointment.
Stop resisting! In many respects, you guys going into secret hiding. Stop resisting.
I'm not resisting.
Yes, you are. Give me your arm. Give me your arm.
I'm lying on.
Give me your arm.
It's dislocated, man.
Give me your arm.
My left arm is.
Give me your arm.
My left arm is dislocated. Damn it!
Give me your arm.
Understand?
Stop hurting him.
Don't you understand? My left arm.
Well, that's a really interesting incident to see here happening in the United States, a democracy. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of how perhaps the Russians might handle some dissent of opinion. Were you expecting to be handled like that?
I was not. The chairman made clear at the beginning of the session that comments could be made. They had to be made quickly, and then the speaker needed to be gone.
Sure.
I went up to say that Senator Wyden was entitled to a straight answer to his question as to whether Haspel supervised waterboarding in Thailand. She danced around it, saying, no, that's secret. Who made it secret? Haspel made it secret.
Okay.
That's when I went up and I said, she's entitled to her own, Senator Wyden and the people watching this on TV, millions of them, were entitled to know that Gina Haspel did indeed, it's documented, supervise the waterboarding of al-Nashiri in Thailand.
Thank you, Ray. Now, Gene, a few days later, the Senate voted on Gina Haspel, and the vote was the closest in history. 55 to 45, she passed. Hardly a ringing endorsement. Why so many reservations in the Senate?
I think it reflects the fact that everything has become so politicized in Washington. For decades, intelligence matters, the CIA, budget, etc., was kept out of this morass. But now everything is political. It's just a sad commentary on how there's no one over the age of 12 in Congress.
One more thing. She will be reporting directly to John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, who is well known for being a policy hawk. What's the concern there?
Well, she reports, actually, the president is who she works for, not John Bolton. So her reporting goes to a number of people.
Oh, well, but John Bolton, of course, is just around the corner in the West Wing from the president. How will he interact with Gina?
Well, John Bolton's pretty blunt about his, as you say, hawkish views on things. But downtown is where policy gets done. The CIA is supposed to run operations, do analysis, and not get involved in politics.
Ray, one more before we move on. Isn't it great that the President Trump has somewhat kept his image as a feminist up by promoting Gina Haspel as the first woman director of the CIA?
Oh, I wish you hadn't asked that question. When I heard the cheers go up after she was sworn in, most of them feminine cheers, I said to myself, my God, what have we created here? Most women approve of this torturer. It's really hard to stomach for someone who worked in an honorable position for the Central Intelligence Agency for 27 years.
Let me ask you about the CIA culture generally. Is it a male-dominated, perhaps even misogynistic agency?
Well, it has been in tradition, and it's better now, of course, but it's still dominated by males. And of course, she got where she is by saying yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, to the males in charge of her.
Okay, thank you for that, Ray. Let's move on now. We know more about the CIA's new director. Let's look at the agency itself. Well, it has an incredible history of interfering in other countries, sometimes successfully and at other times with disastrous consequences. The Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. They call themselves America's first line of defense against international threats. And, so the theory goes, they employ all sorts of methods to get the job done, from chemtrails to mind-controlled drugs. But of course, they actually operate in great secrecy.
You labor in obscurity by choice and design, serving with quiet patriotism that seeks neither spotlight nor praise.
It's arguably the most famous intelligence agency in the world, founded in 1947 in the aftermath of the Second World War. The agency's motto, the work of a nation, the center of intelligence. It operates out of the George Bush Center for Intelligence in Virginia, named after perhaps the agency's most famous director and former president of the United States. It employs an estimated 21,000 people, and as of 2013, had an annual budget of $15 billion. Its most secretive practices are the work of its Special Activities Center, divided into two branches. The Special Operations Group, responsible for tactical paramilitary operations, in other words, the men and women with guns, and the other branch, the Political Action Group, responsible for political influence, propaganda, and economic warfare. In other words, the men and women with pens. And the agency operates globally. Its reach can be felt on every continent, but mostly it's here and here. One of its most notable successes came in 1953. The elected Prime Minister of Iran wanted to nationalize the oil industry. The UK and America weren't having it. The CIA staged a campaign of bribery and propaganda, stirring up discontent until eventually revolution, then arranging for the return of the exiled US-friendly Shah. A short-term victory with long-term consequences. 8 years later, it set its sights on Cuba. Communist revolutionary had taken over the island and Washington wanted them out. The CIA covertly trained, armed and funded a group of around 1,500 Cuban exiles. Their mission? To invade and overthrow Fidel Castro. With US air and sea support, the Bay of Pigs invasion
was bound to be a success. Or not. Ordinary Cubans didn't come to the exiles' aid as expected, leaving the American president embarrassed.
Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan.
And it was this very public defeat that cemented Castro's rule, which went on and on for 49 years. Fast forward to the 80s and the Cold War keeps the spooks busy. During the Soviet war in Afghanistan, CIA paramilitary operations officers ensured US-funded equipment reached guerrilla forces fighting the Russians. An operation credited with helping to end the conflict, but it also opened the door to the Taliban. But that wouldn't become a huge regret for at least another decade or so.
Well, let's go back to our former operatives. Ray McGovern, if I could start with you. Does your former agency, your former employer, do more harm than good?
Well, I was amazed that the operation overthrowing Mossadegh in Iran in 1953 was described as a success. My God, look what happened. Look at Iran now. There's no reason why Iran should be seen as an enemy to the United States. When you look at the possibilities back in '53, it was the Soviet menace, and it was the British that took us by the arm and said, "You're a young agency." When an upstart, freely elected prime minister wants to nationalize the oil that we own under the sands of Iran, this is what you do, and that's what we did.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation of history. Mr. Mossadegh was also increasing ties with the Soviet Union. Would this have been a much better thing if you'd have had Iran become part of the Soviet Empire?
What about that, Ray?
Well, I think historians, honest ones, would certainly take issue with that.
Okay.
The Soviet menace was always advertised as a reason to intervene.
Gina,
Still is.
If I could ask you broadly, though, does the agency create more problems than it solves?
No, I don't think so. And I think you really need to remember that when the CIA gets involved in Iran, in Afghanistan, it is at the direction of the President of the United States.
Well, let's talk about the President of the United States, Donald Trump. What is their attitude towards him now? He's been in office for over a year. What does the CIA think of him?
Well, when I talk to my friends who are still working back there, you get mixed opinions of him. It'd probably be better if no one let him send out tweets, but just because he doesn't agree with what someone in the intelligence community says, and I'm rather amused that, let us say, the very liberal Democratic Party faction now suddenly believes and bemoans when the intelligence community is not accepted. This is the same community who said there's WMD in Iraq.
Let me bring in John Brennan here in a way. First of all, I have to tell our viewers who he is. Of course, the former director of the CIA. Now, here's the Situation Room on the day they got Osama bin Laden. There's President Obama there. And there in the background, as you'd expect, the former director of the CIA, John Brennan. Now, here's what he has had to say, not a recent comment, but still while he was president, about Donald Trump. When the full extent of your venality, moral turpitude and political corruption becomes known, you will take your rightful place as a disgraced demagogue in the dustbin of history. But you will not destroy America. America will triumph over you. Gene, if I can just come back briefly, what does the CIA think of their old boss, John Brennan?
John Brennan was known as the greatest sycophant in the history of the agency. He schmoozed his way up to the top. He broke with tradition and made it clear he was supporting Hillary Clinton before the elections occurred. And now anything he has to say, I think you have to keep in mind, he's just pissed because he didn't get to stay on as director.
I think we've finally come to a point that you and Ray can agree on. Ray?
You're quite right. I agree completely. He actually participated in an operation to deny Donald Trump the presidency. That is provable demonstrably. So, you know, the cows are going to come home here, so to speak, and he's going to be lawyered up, and he's going to be asked why it was that this fake dossier was prepared, and why it was that they chose Papadopoulos, a very dubious source, to persuade the FBI to mount an investigation of a candidate for the presidency.
Thank you, Ray. Well, the CIA is arguably the most famous intelligence agency in the world, thanks to all those Hollywood films. But is it the best? After an exhaustive search of open source material, here's our top 5.
In at 5, Russia's FSB, the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation. The FSB replaced the KGB after the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. It operates from the old KGB headquarters in Lubyanka in Moscow. No official figures on how many people it employs, but some experts estimate at least 200,000. At 4, Israel's Mossad, or the Institute. Formed in 1949, a year after Israel declared independence. With approximately 1,200 employees, it's small but highly active in a dangerous neighborhood. The annual combined budget for Israel's Shin Bet internal security service and the Mossad is estimated to be $2.4 billion. In at 3, Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI. Formed in 1948 following the war with India, which exposed weaknesses in intelligence gathering. It's a highly secretive organization, and personnel and funding are either unknown or classified. Neighboring India and Afghanistan, the ISI is constantly active. And now, let's jump to number 1. Yes, it's the CIA. For all its money, staff, expertise, and sheer reach, you probably can't beat the Americans. But for sheer class, number 2 has to be the agency that gave you 007 himself, MI6. We've known about its existence for years, but it was only officially acknowledged to exist in 1994. MI6 has over 2,500 staff, and together with MI5 and GCHQ, is one of Britain's 3 security and intelligence agencies. The 3 combined receive an annual budget of around $3.3 billion.
Well, let's ask the 2 former CIA operatives who they think's best, starting with you, Gene. Who's the best in the world?
Well, it's the CIA because we spend more money than anyone else on the planet. In terms of technical gathering, we have officers practically everywhere in the world. The only group that comes even close are the British. But as far as Pakistan, Mossad, they're very good in their little neighborhood.
Right.
But
hey, Ray, Gene actually made you laugh there. Well, you know, it's not pound for pound the best. It's actually dollar for dollar the best in a way.
Well, no, you know, you can throw money at any problem.
Yeah.
After 9/11, the money going to CIA tripled 3 times. And yet it came as a complete surprise when Mr. Putin got up on the 1st of March and advertised 5 or 6 new strategic weapons that the CIA didn't seem to be aware of. And this goes to my point about analysis. We've been talking all about operations. When you compare these people, you're talking about operations. Analysis is why the CIA was set up. And if you can't tell the president that the Russians are building these very sophisticated systems that can defy and penetrate any anti-ballistic missile system, if you can't tell him that, you're not very he's not getting a good thing for his buck.
Well, with all due respect, Ray, you had 27 years at the agency, but I've got Hollywood's account of it. Let's have a look at the Good Shepherd.
The president has asked me to look into creating a foreign intelligence. We don't have to be gentlemen anymore.
What is your name?
You're the guys that scare me. You're the people that make big wars.
And we make sure the wars are small ones.
First opportunity you boys get, you're going to be breaking and entering like thieves in the night.
Margaret tells us that you work with the CIA. My wife has.
And back to Gene, who had 30 years at the agency. You know, you remind me a bit of Matt Damon, Gene. Was life at the CIA like that?
That's it. Absolutely true. That's exactly the way it is. Yeah, I've got my Jaguar with the machine guns parked outside.
The problem is with being a CIA agent is that you can't really use it in a social setting. And it would be the killer line when you're trying to chat up somebody. But what can you say, really? You have to probably say you're a traveling salesman who sells shoes.
Well, very few people walk around the world saying, "Hi, I'm the CIA man here in town."
Only deluded lunatics.
Yes, you're undercover as a U.S. diplomat or a shoe salesman.
Yeah.
So they bring you in touch with things.
Does it take a toll on your private life?
Well, it took a toll on our life when my wife and I served in Moscow, and we'd been told in advance that the KGB would have microphones and possibly cameras in there. And my wife announced that she was immediately going on a diet. She said she'd put up with the KGB seeing her naked, but not overweight and naked.
Okay, Gene. Well, on that humorous note, we've just got one more thing for our viewers, a little bit more satire, care of American Dad. Watch this.
All right, lads, now that we're in the air, I can tell you our top secret objective. Osama bin Laden.
But sir, they already got bin Laden in Pakistan.
Silly Smith, silly goose. That was just something we faked to make the president look good.
These gentlemen know all about that. Gene Coyle, thank you very much for your time today in the Nexus, and also Ray McGovern, thank you very much also. Well, that is all time we have for the Nexus for now. Don't forget you can see this and all the other episodes on our YouTube channel. Do subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you next week.